Cool. All right. So I am Stacy Briscoe. I'm a wine journalist and editor with Wine Industry Network. And we are continuing our series on the virtual event for the wine trade. And so as a side note, the guests that have been on this series are also going to appear at this year's three-tier wine symposium, which is taking place online this year, September 2nd and 3rd. So interested viewers can sign up on the website, and I will provide a link in the description below this video. So today we're talking with Mike Wangbickler, and he's the president of Balzac Communications, and that's a marketing communications company specializing in the beverage, food, and travel industries. So Mike, why don't you start and tell us a little bit about what Balzac Communications does specifically for the wine industry, just a little bit of what you do.
Sure. So we help our clients to communicate about their story and their message. So that involves everything from developing said story and message to using various communications tools to get the word out. So traditional media relations, digital marketing, events, any number of other activities that we work on in order to help our clients to build their brand and sell more wine.
And so I'm assuming with the current situation, a lot of that has moved online.
Yes.
Yeah.
A lot more digital right now. Yeah.
A lot more digital right now.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, when we were talking earlier and we were talking about pitching to the media and getting wine specific media involved, you actually had some interesting insight as to how to vet those journalists, bloggers, critics, or anything like that. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. You know, it comes right down to when we're talking about public relations or media relations, whatever, use them interchangeably. The important word in that is relations. And so I think there's a perception that media relations or PR is about sending out press releases or just, sending blind samples to people and expecting them to write about your company or your product. And the fact is that that's just not how it works. It's never worked that way. And especially it doesn't really work that way. And it's all about building relationships. It's all about how you build those relationships. And when I say relationships, some of the most successful companies out there in terms of communicating about their brand are successful because the owners or the executives have developed a rapport with key journalists or key bloggers, as the case may be. And so if you want to know whether somebody is worth your time, you need to get to know them, right? So if you have a conversation with a blogger per se, and it becomes readily apparent that, it's not a match for you, then that's somebody you can take off your list and you don't have to ever contact them again. And I have a number of methods by which I vet our media contacts and whether we think that they are worthy. I mean, one of the things is that, does it actually align with the brand? So for instance, if I'm working on a luxury brand that's, $100 bottle or more, I'm not gonna be going to certain journalists that are writing about $20 and under bottles.
Right.
If I have a California brand, I'm not gonna send samples to a guy in New York who only writes about New York wines.
Right.
So, you need to, first of all, you need to do homework. And then I also look at quality over quantity. So, getting a good article, a well-written article written by a respected blogger, journalist, what have you, is going to be much more valuable to you as a brand than, say, a couple of sentences written as a review of one of your wines on some blog that doesn't really have any kind of real engagement with their audience, right? So I don't care if the blogger only has like 200, 300 readers.
Mhm.
If they're a good writer and the quality is there, first of all, the more readers will find them. But second of all, those 200, 300 readers are going to be much more engaged and interested in your business and your product than uh, than 10,000 people who aren't, right? Who aren't engaged. So, just think about that, the potential of additional sales to those people if they're engaged by the person who's writing about your product.
Right. So it sounds like it does involve a little bit of research on your part or the part of the winery to go and Google these people, read articles that have been published. If they have a personal blog, see what kind of engagement they have on that blog. Maybe even stalk their social media accounts and see if they're
right. So that's the thing. It's like, nowadays it's not just about the blog, right? Because they may have nobody commenting on their blog, which is very common nowadays. Like very few people actually comment on blogs anymore. It used to be everybody would, but hardly anybody does it anymore. What they do is they go over to social media and they comment there, right? And so seeing how engaged they are with their readers or listeners or what have you in their social channels will also give you an idea of really what their real reach is, not just necessarily how many people are coming to their blog.
Right. Okay. So after you've figured out who you want to pitch to, do you have tips on how to get those folks engaged in your winery client or wine brand client?
Yeah. I mean, part of it again is establishing those relationships. So I mean, one of the advantages of working with an agency like ours is that we already have those relationships established, and then we can leverage those on your behalf as a company. But let's say you can't afford a PR agency, or you just don't want to hire one. What you need to do is you absolutely have to do your homework, right? You absolutely have to Google the writers. Like I hear from wineries all the time that they get bombarded by requests from bloggers, right? They want samples sent to them, et cetera, and so on. And some of those are legit, but a lot of them aren't. And I think it's left a sour taste in the mouths of a lot of winery owners that they kind of feel like the term blogger basically means freeloader, and that's a disservice to them, because the fact is that there are some very valuable voices out there that if you can work with them, they can definitely have a benefit to your brand. So that, I mean, the next step is to reach out to them, right? And generally speaking, most people prefer to be contacted first by email. It's just generally how people have kind of operated these days. Though that said, we're also kind of moving more towards social engagement. So like reaching out on LinkedIn or Facebook, sending them a message saying, hey, I'd like to connect with you, and I have some interesting things I might want to talk to you about. And so, and that's really what it kind of comes down to, is that you have to think about like who you're talking to and whether what you're offering them is of value to them. You as a wine producer, beverage producer, whatever, you have your own agenda, right? Your agenda is to sell your wines and get people, and as a communications person, to get people to write about your wines. Great. That's the goal, the outcome. But getting there, you need to make sure that you're playing the long game, that you're establishing those key relationships. Some of those, by the way, will go away. I mean, sometimes you'll establish a relationship and somebody decides, I don't want to write about wine anymore. That's okay, because there's plenty of others that are coming along. And that's one of the keys here, is that you have to kind of keep up on that, right? You need to keep up on like who's writing for whom and for what. Again, that's kind of the advantage of going with a PR agency, but you can also easily do it on your own, either through Google searches. The Google Alerts is a great way of getting news and figuring out like who's new writing something. Doing searches in social and see who's writing about. Let's say you're Oregon Pinot Noir producer. Well, who's writing about Oregon Pinot Noir? Doing a search and figuring that out, like who's an influencer, who's a key influencer in Oregon Pinot Noir, and then working on engaging that influencer to see if you can establish some sort of rapport, and therefore it benefits both of you as individuals. That's the thing. I mean, it's got to be both give and take, right? It can't just be a one-sided thing.
Yeah. So
you
when
need to
you're
give them something of value, and they in turn will give you something of value.
When you're putting on these virtual events for the media, do you find it beneficial to have a large audience, or just like 3 or 4 specific journalists or bloggers who are interested in a specific topic and cater the conversation to them? Or is it better to do kind of a broad, cast a wide net and say, we have a new wine, or we have a new series, or we have a new...
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it depends on the situation. I mean, sure, there are times when, we have a new release, or we're pitching a particular idea that, we want to send out to multiple people, and we want to send it out to a wide distribution. That's fine. As long as you consider that you've already had some sort of interaction with the people you're sending this to, right? So, because you're not going to get many results with somebody who you've sent something to out of the blue and they don't know who you are. Right. So, and I mean, if you play the law of averages and something like that, I mean, a good return on something that's going to be 20 to 30% of people who you've sent out invitations to, or, inquiries to, that will respond. Sometimes we get it up to like 50%, depending on what the brand is. But it's a little more of a shotgun approach. There are definitely there's probably like 20 individuals in the country who I would consider to be like the top tier wine influencers or writers. And for those folks, it's definitely more effective to reach out to them one-on-one, build that rapport, build that engagement, see if they're interested in something. If they're not interested this time, they might be interested next time, right? So just kind of keep that in mind. Don't give up. But, these are folks like Letty Teague at the Wall Street Journal, Eric Asimov at the New York Times, Esther Mobley at the San Francisco Chronicle, David McIntyre at the Washington Post. These are regional writers, but they have a national presence, and it's much more valuable to you as a producer if you are able to get them to engage with you, like they're into it, right? That they get it. When you finally convince them and they get it, then they're going to be your advocate, right? They're going to be, frankly, one of your biggest fans, because I've seen writers out there who really fall in love with a particular producer and their wines, because they're quality, or because they have something to them that they really dig. And what happens with stuff like that is that they're often written about, like anytime the person does roundup reviews, or they want to do a sort of feature once a year, then those are the people they go back to.
Right. Yeah, that was the other thing that you had mentioned for these kind of virtual tastings that are going on nowadays, where it's a group of journalists. It's kind of more of the B and C level journalists, not the writers with the national presence, like you just mentioned.
Right.
So, if you're talking to these folks who, are doing these group, I guess more like group tastings, do you find that it's better to kind of have because I've done both, where you are engaged with the winemaker or the producer or whoever's doing the tasting, and you can raise your hand, take yourself off mute, and you're basically face to face. But then I've done other ones where it's clearly there's a large number of writers out there. You don't see anybody, and it's more of a webinar or slideshow, if you will, a presentation.
Mm-hmm.
Is one more successful for you than the other, or are there different circumstances where one form might work better than the other?
I think it depends on your goals
Okay.
and what outcomes you're expecting
Mm-hmm.
from the activity. If your expectation is just to establish top of mind and mind share with
Mm-hmm.
a bunch of journalists, then something that is along the lines of a webinar, which is a lot of people, makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But if your goal is a feature article in a particular publication,
Mm-hmm.
or you want to communicate about a special event you're doing, or like a particular charity activity that you're doing, and then in those situations, it really is better to pitch people one-on-one and to see if they're interested. And the other thing is, like, you can always basically go to people, say, hey, are you interested in this exclusive?
Mm-hmm.
We've got this information. Are you interested in this exclusive? If they say no, and you're like, okay, great. You go to the next guy and say, are you interested in this exclusive? Right. So you have a list of, people you go down, you say, okay, we want to get in our feature article in one of these publications. So let's go down the list and see who's interested in this.
And something else that you brought up too is, and I think we all kind of know this, winemakers, some have great personalities and they've told their story so many times and they've got it down pat, but a lot of folks are not comfortable, especially now that they're in front of a camera. They're not as comfortable. So do you have tips for your clients when they're about to get on screen and tell their story to help prepare them?
Yeah, if you ideally, it would be to hire a professional to train you, right? Mm-hmm. So media training is definitely one of those activities that is worth the investment. Mm-hmm. I fully believe that anybody at the C-suite level of any company, whether that's the owner, the president, the chief marketing officer, the vice president of marketing, whatever, that they will all benefit from media coaching, media training. Mm-hmm. Just because it's not a natural thing for most people, right? To sit in front of somebody and talk about themselves or talk about their product, in a way that, stays on message and communicates what you actually want to communicate with people. So, if you can't do the professional thing, then what you should do is make sure, first of all, you write down your key points, right? So if you have key points you want to make, pick 3 points. That's what they're going to walk away with. Keep to those points, right? Everything should kind of come back around to those points. And then what you want to do is you want to sit down with a friend, a colleague, your wife, your husband, whatever, and run through a scenario with them, right? Role play, have them kind of do a fake interview with you so that you become comfortable with quickly answering questions, answering with the right answers. And then the other person who you're doing this with can critique you on, like, maybe not use so much, or you really need to pause and think about what you want to say before you actually say it. These sorts of things. Get somebody to help you, because doing this in a vacuum is you might succeed, but you're much more likely to succeed if you practice and you get help.
And I know a lot of people who use PR agencies or communication companies like yours, someone will step in from the company and act as a moderator or someone who can veer the person back on track. Mm-hmm. Do you think that, if I'm the kind of person that, I can't afford a PR company, or I'm not sure if I want to work with one, but I still want to try these tastings, is it beneficial to get another person on your team to act as a moderator?
Yes. I'll say not necessarily a moderator, but as a support mechanism, right? Because if you as the interviewee are starting to stumble,
Mm-hmm.
You're stumbling over your words, or you're having a hard time kind of formulating your thoughts,
Mm-hmm.
that person can step in and either ask questions, say, hey, Mike, we had talked about this earlier. Is this kind of along the same lines of what that person's asking? Or they can step in and say, hey, what we actually have been saying is so and so and such and such.
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually helpful, because it also, if you aren't comfortable necessarily speaking one-on-one with anybody, really, having
Mm-hmm.
somebody else there to
Mm-hmm.
lean on if you have to, makes it a little easier and much more comfortable.
All right. So one of my last questions for you is this whole virtual thing. It's definitely brought the world together.
Yeah.
I think it's, if one had to think of a positive of what we're going through right now, it's that, I can talk to you, you can talk to me, and we don't even have to be in the same country if
Yep.
we aren't, So do you think this is something that is going to continue in our perfect post-pandemic world?
Yes. I've been trying to push all of my clients and other people in the industry
Mm-hmm.
further down the technology pathway for a number of years.
Yeah.
Not for the sake of technology, but for the sake of efficiency and
Right.
being able to do things that you can't do before, or being able to accomplish things in a fraction of the time that you could do before. Things like, having great CRM and, doing marketing automation and setting up things like this. I was using Zoom quite a bit before the pandemic, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm using, I don't know how many a day. I average like
Yeah.
3 a day probably
Yeah.
at this point. I've had 3 today. So, the cool thing is, nothing is ever going to substitute for face-to-face, touchy contact, right?
Yeah.
We all, as human beings, crave that, right? We always, build a much greater rapport with people when we've sat down with them, we've shared a glass of wine, had a meal with them.
Mm-hmm.
Those sorts of activities will come back. That said, things like this, I think, have pushed the industry as a whole forward in terms of marketing acumen and
Mm-hmm.
opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
So whereas they may not have thought of certain things before to use technology for, like Zoom,
Mm-hmm.
now they're like, okay, we can do this for a fraction of the cost and the fraction of the amount of time, doing it over Zoom than we would have done if we did this, ride
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
with our distributor, which, I think you'll talk to just about every producer says 90% of the time those are worthless. So if you can stay in your office at your winery, send some wines out to folks, and then meet them via this method and still get the sales coming in,
Mm-hmm.
think about the return on investment that's going to provide in the future.
Definitely. Yeah.
It makes you much more efficient, and frankly, it's gonna make business a lot easier, I think, moving forward. Because I think this is just the tip of the iceberg. Because this has kind of pushed us into this direction, but I think that as producers, as marketers, kind of start to figure out other opportunities and technologies out there that they could be using, I think we'll start to see a lot more sophistication out of marketing and PR from beverage producers.
Excellent. Yeah, that seems to be the opinion that we're hearing from our other guests as well. Um, cool. So that was my last question. Is there anything that you want to add or other insight that you want to impart?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, again, it kind of comes down to that the times have pushed us more towards digital,
Mm-hmm.
and in fact, I mean, that's been moving in that direction for 20 years. When I first started in wine PR 20 years ago, we weren't doing nearly what we're doing today. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of how we're communicating, the
Mm-hmm.
what the what we're communicating, and the fundamentals of good marketing and PR still exist. Doesn't matter what technology you're using. It doesn't matter what mode of communication you're using. Those fundamentals of having a solid story, having a solid strategy, all that stuff moving forward still exists. And so don't lose sight of that. Like, don't see the shiny object and want to rush to it without considering, like, how does this fit in with our overall marketing strategy, PR strategy for this brand?
Right.
So have that strategy, have that plan in place. And I'm not talking about like for 3 months. I'm talking about for 3 years to 30 years even. Just have an idea of where you want to go, because if you have no idea where you want to go, you have no idea how to get there. So figure out where you want to go, and then figure out how you're going to get there.
Cool. I think that's the perfect place to stop. So thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Again, Mike, along with our other guests on this topic, will be at the 3-Tier Wine Symposium on September 2nd and 3rd. So we can sign up on the Wine Industry website. And yeah, I guess that's it. Thank you so much.
Thanks.